There's something weird, but I can't put my finger on it. Oh, God, it's coming to me. Oh, wait, is it besides the beard and the shaved head? What can I say? I'm training for a Spartan race and I wanted to be peak efficient. Or maybe I'm doing my character arc where I was the rebellious character that didn't like authority, but suddenly he's thrust in a authority position and a time skip has kind of happened, so to show that he's aged and kind of disciplined up, he shaves his head and grows a beard. Oh wait, is this my character arc? Oh no. Hello everyone, welcome to Middle Fantasy. I am your host Zack, and I have a very unique episode today. Usually when I hear this talked about, it's usually are you for this or against it? Ebooks versus physical books. And we're going to be taking a different approach on this because for me, reading is reading no matter how you do it, may it be pages, ebooks, or audiobooks, as long as you're pursuing and at least getting that information put into your brain somehow, you're still enjoying the story and still following the narrative. So no matter how you do it, you'll do it. But today, the video that I'm going to be making is how ebooks have really changed my life, especially when it comes to the fantasy genre, and has really helped improve middle fantasy. We'll talk about the pros and the cons, and for me, why I really respect ebooks when it comes to the fantasy genre. Yes, there's some setbacks and drawbacks, and things are a little different, but we're going to talk about what's good about it, what's bad about it. In the end of the day, do you want to have a 10,000 page book or one of these mother truckers with you? So why don't we start? So like most of my generation, I've grown up my entire life reading physical books, reading it on paper, and when it comes down to it, I've always had this love of it. I've gone to use bookstores, libraries. For me, the high that I chase is that thrill that you got, that thrill of the hunt, when you would go to the book fair and pick up like that weird Corvette poster or some weird things like the newest edition of the Guinness Book of World Records. Or even, do you remember when you would go to class and they would have, hey, you can buy stuff and your teacher will mail it out and you'll get a box later on, and when you got it, you're like, this is awesome. I missed that so much. It was on that news clipping. I don't remember what it was called, but I remember how cool that was. Does anyone else remember that? Yeah, but physical books will always have a special place in my heart. But recently, especially when it comes to travel and then technology, now I've kind of switched a little bit over to ebooks. This hasn't been a new thing. This actually has been a thing for the last 2 to 3 years. The first time I actually bought an ebook was I had brought in like 5 books with me while I was on vacation, and I read through every single one of them. And I was pretty much, hey, I really do want to read more books, but I don't have any more, and I couldn't find a bookstore. But there was an option to get an ebook, which I went to like a Target or a Best Buy and bought a Kindle. And this isn't the original one, but I remember buying it and just downloading a bunch of books and still continuing to read. And really since then, it's actually been kind of a snowball effect of switching between the physical and the ebook. But for me, when it comes down to it, especially when it comes to fantasy is notorious for having huge page counts. A lot of times you need to take notes. And in the end of the day, I think ebooks are actually really helpful for this. Now, when it comes to me with ebooks and fantasy, I've always found that for me, when it comes to reading fantasy or reading any book, I usually kind of have like boxes. It usually comes to how comfortable I am reading it, how many pages are there, and lastly, kind of just when it comes down to it, how complex is the story and do you need to take notes? Now, when it comes to the pros of reading this on an ebook, I think ebooks do check the box a lot, especially when it comes to fantasy, where you're pretty much thrusted in a world where sometimes you need to write down quotes or character names and take notes. Ebooks do a really good job of this because there's always been like that weird notion of how you shouldn't annotate in your books, even though when I was doing history or doing classes where it's like you must write in the book, you had to turn in your To Kill a Mockingbird. It has to have markings. You have to mark your favorite quotes. And kind of like there's been like this thing, especially when it comes to people where should you do that or what's going on here? But when it comes to an ebook, you kind of have like no regret when it comes down to it, where you can actually mark it up and you can even share it with people. And for me, what I love about ebooks is that you have that kind of ability to pick out notes, look at certain phrases. Though at the same time, depending on what ebook reader you have, especially for me, I've always been Kindle because I just like how they are and their library is vast, is that sometimes you have to be careful because I have this thing called X-ray mode on where you'll see like passages that 1,000 people did this. And you're like, oh, this must be like really significant. And you kind of might start thinking, is that significant or is this like a big old spoiler? Or is this the thing that people hang up on their kitchen, like live, laugh, love type of quotes? And for me, it can be a double-edged sword a little bit, but for me, I love the ability to be able to switch between looking for quotes that I like, especially when it comes to reviews. A lot of the stuff that I'll talk about is based off of notes that I'm taking while I'm reading. Instead of pulling out the paper and the pen and writing down the page, I have a much easier time when it comes down to that. Now, we might as well talk about when it comes to it as well. I think one of my biggest pros of reading ebooks for fantasy is just how comfortable they are. Like, this thing is not heavy one bit. This is, I could drop this and it might flutter down. That's how light it feels. It's good in the hands. But when it comes to a traditional book, I'm gonna look at the Way of Kings when it comes down to this. Oh, my life sprint. Yeah, when it comes to being comfortable, I don't think this book is really comfortable when it comes to reading. Yeah, if you're like working out and doing like your calisthenics and just doing strength training, The Way of Kings is a perfect book, but for a lot of people, it's impractical when it comes to going to places, like maybe going around the town and just putting this in your pocket. Good luck! But when it comes to ebooks, you can put it in the back of your pockets, or you can put it pretty much anywhere if you're having riddles in the dark. It's a really good thing to have. And for me, that's kind of the thing, is like when you're doing long reads, where sometimes I'll read for 3 or 4 hours, this book will be painful to read, because sometimes I call these wrist snappers a little bit. And for me, it's better to have an ebook in this case where you don't have to worry about holding it up. Like, it isn't a battle between your wrists and the words. It's more of just reading it and taking in the information. But at the same time, when it comes to ebooks, I do kind of have like a thing when it comes to the chafing, where you'll read it and the hard plastic digs into your skin. But at the same time, it takes a lot more time to do that. Now, the other thing that I love about this, especially when it comes to being comfortable, is one of the reasons why I love ebooks for fantasy books is that you have the idea and you also have the ability to customize it any way you want when it comes to the lettering, the print size, especially at night where sometimes you're getting a little tired. This is where like you can change the font, the text, you can even turn on backlight or even turn it on to dark mode. And you're gonna be more efficient while reading it compared to finding like a weird, uncomfortable place to read. I'm a person that reads books like this, or like, you know, on my side, or I'll read it in just weird positions. But when it comes to ebooks, I can just read it any way that I want. I can still read it like this and hold it up there for hours, or I can read it on my side or my back, or when I'm doing random things. And I've always found that to be a really comfortable thing to do, especially when it comes to reading, where, you know, you're supposed to be devoting most of your brain power to reading rather than putting up the fight of trying to read the book. Yes, there's some books that are different, especially when it comes to lighter books. Like, it's my fault that I read phone book fantasy, but that's the thing, is it's a good hurdle to have when it comes to reading, because when you actually get past that hurdle of not worrying about the comfort of the book, you're gonna have a lot more fun and a lot more experience. Though I do have some cons when it comes to ebook for fantasy. I think it actually goes with when it comes to the comfort, you're actually getting a little bit of a drawback depending on what series you're reading. For example, I reread Dune on my ebook, and I was having a hard time remembering certain concepts. And the great thing about Dune is that Frank Herbert included a glossary in the back. Problem with ebooks is that it's really, really, really hard to navigate when it comes to the glossaries and certain things when it comes to fantasy books where you need that, or in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, there's like the dramatic personae. It's been a while since I've read the first book. I just remember there's a whole page where it's like, here are all the players and stuff. That's hard to do in this as well, because I tried to do a reread of that. And when it comes to it, sometimes practicality kind of gets in the way of, okay, you're reading this book, but being able to switch between the glossary and what you were rereading will take a lot more effort than just picking up the physical book and flipping to the glossary and keeping your thumb where that your page was and like looking through the, oh, this is the term for this and that. And that's wonderful and fine and dandy. But for ebooks, that can be a pain. Another big one that I've heard a lot of people talk about is books you don't have to charge, but ebooks you have to. For me, it depends on the battery life. For me, I've always had no problem. I've had some rare cases where my ebook just decides to die on me for some weird reason. And I'm like, wow, this is embarrassing. And oh no, I'll just find like a micro USB and move forward. And I mean, that's the thing, is you have to depend on technology in the way of you might need like power sometimes. But then again, when it comes to books, I've never heard the exact argument of, oh no, I'm running out of time, the sun's going down, I have to find a lamp. It's still the equivalent almost of charging. Yeah, sometimes you might have to wait a little bit, but it's one of those things that occurs. Another drawback that I have, and this is going to be an interesting one I feel like, is that when it comes to ebooks compared to physical books, you're losing a little bit of the journey. Yes, there's that comfort level thing, but when you're reading a book, you actually can physically see where you are in the story and how much you've done. Like, oh wow, I've read this many pages today. Wow, that's amazing, compared to reading an ebook where it's just, look, I've gone up 15%. You don't have that weight, so you can't feel the story and how heavy it is. And sometimes you don't get that sense of accomplishment. But at the exact same time, again, if you're reading a lot and you're kind of like plowing through books, maybe that might not be the sense of accomplishment that you feel like, especially when it comes to finishing a book physically. Like, I see all these books. I feel like these are like little awards for finishing them. Yeah, some of them I might not have read, but they're still there. I could always pick them up and keep them. But when it comes to ebooks, you have this vast library, and this is something I'm going to bring up, is that when it comes to ebooks and fantasy, I love it specifically because I love things like Libby, where you can connect it to your library, especially during this pandemic, where maybe you can't even go to your library just simply because they're not open. For me, that was the case. We actually got a brand new library in town, and literally 2 weeks after it opened, COVID happened and it closed down. I still haven't gone. I've gone into it once. It's a beautiful place, but thankfully I was able to get Libby, and Libby works with the Kindle and most e-readers. And for me, what I love about it is that I'm able to pick out books that maybe I might not be sure about in many ways, especially when it comes to, do I want to read this? Well, no one's really, picking it up right now. I might as well read it, and I read it, and kind of if I like it, I'll finish it, or maybe I didn't finish it. But at least it's a different change of pace, especially when it comes to looking for books. Whereas when I go to a used bookstore or something that's, I have to figure out what's going to happen. Do I want it based on the cover or the story? Whereas when it comes to ebooks, the selection of things you want to find is vast, and there's that convenience where you can just click a button and you get it. Yeah, maybe it might be Libby, maybe it might just be getting the book for $2.99. Examples of this for me is some books that I actually bought because they had some great deals compared to just buying it like the physical book, because those prices are all over the place. Is that I read a lot of Mark Lawrence's stuff. That's the first time that I read the Lightbringer series. The first time that I read Kings of the Wild was actually through an ebook. Like, things like that are some of my favorite things. You'll find discoveries based off of deals. And this isn't just a plug for all this stuff, but that's something to think about, is you have a bigger selection. And here's the thing, is that a lot of self-published authors, like I'm reading one right now for a review. That's how I get ARCs now, advanced reader copies or review copies, is all through ebook. I haven't actually gotten I think the last physical book that I actually got was Axiom's End by Lindsay Ellis right here. But the first time that I got it was through an ebook, because again, the pandemic was here, and thankfully I had my ebook at that time where I was, and I plowed through that book, and eventually they did send me one. But at the exact same time, that's just how things change a little bit. Now, another thing that I'll talk about when it comes to this is not really a pro or a con, but I think it's one of those things, like that mentality that you get into, because when it comes to fantasy, I want to be more poured into the world than kind of my surroundings. And I think when it comes down to it, ebooks do a good job of, kind of just blocking out your surroundings, because you have the thing of the backlight, where that for me is the biggest game changer, because I would use it sometimes where when I was sleeping, sometimes my girlfriend would be sleeping right next to me and I don't want to turn the lamp on. So I would just turn on the e-reader, read it, keep it like a low thing, and they would be sleeping, I would be happy. We all win in the end. And that's the thing, backlight really changed a lot of things, because it used to be I'd have to roll around, maybe even get one of these, like the camera lights that I have right now, to use it. And for me, it's a big thing to have, because you're always gonna have, again, more time to focus on the words rather than, am I in the right light, or what's going on here? In the end of the day, I think that's such a huge game changer for me. Now, the cool thing about this is I actually proposed this question and kind of talked about why do people like ebooks on my Twitter, and actually have some amazing responses. So here are a couple of them. Wow, those responses were so great. Wow, I'm gonna have links down to all those people down below. Check them out, it's going to be so cool. And it's interesting to hear people's debates about this, especially when it comes to it. We'll eventually settle that debate about physical books versus ebooks, but it's one of those things that we talk about, and it's always gonna be a conversation that we're always gonna have. There's always gonna be the old guard and the people that want to embrace technology. But for me, when it comes to fantasy, I like kind of having the fantastical. One nerdy thing, I like reading sci-fi books with an e-reader because it feels like I'm in the future a little bit and how people probably would read books. It always reminds me of the books that they have in Dune, where it's kind of like a mix between an e-reader and a physical book. Like, just look up those passages, those are so cool in Dune. I love that type of stuff, but I always think about that and kind of how futuristic it is. But at the same time, sometimes I just want to unplug through technology and turn off Wi-Fi or even stop looking at a screen. So I'll read a physical book. So in the end, for me, it's just a matter of preference. And sometimes I'll switch between most of them. For me, ebooks is usually when I travel, but when I'm home, I will read a physical book. But if it's past a certain page limit, I'm just gonna read it as an ebook. Sorry, Brandon Sanderson fans. I love Brandon Sanderson's work, but it's real good on an ebook. I'm not gonna lie about that. Read Rhythm of War that way. Haven't had a problem. That's the only reason why I don't have it right here is because one, it's expensive, and two, I would just snap my wrists. I have to wait for the mass paperback just because I'm the person that likes to have uniformity a little bit. Yeah, so I'll get that eventually, probably in like a year or so, but that's kind of how it is. What did you all think of this? Do you have a comment about this? What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear you all share it down below. Well, everyone, thank you all so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it. If you like this video, maybe consider subscribing or maybe giving a thumbs up. It would really help in the algorithm and getting more people to share these videos and see them, because it's a lot of fun to do all this stuff. Well, thank you all so much. And like always, may your food and drink ever be tasteful. May your books be filled with fantasy and adventure. Bye, everyone. See ya.